Live?
Yes, you are live.
Sorry. All right, guys. This is it. This is first of all, I just wanted to take just a moment. Sorry, my eyes are gonna be shifted over here as I'm again, originally we were planning on this. Tonight's talk was gonna be at a university setting, the University of Arkansas, in front of a diverse crowd. We invited the geology department, the astronomy department, the biology department, a ton of different groups to come critique us, show us where we're in error, whatever the case may be. So now that we're going more online, due to COVID and everything, we've had to change things out a little bit. So again, these talks should be streamed on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live. Thank you, Stephen Policastro and IAC. But they can also be watched later, shared with family, friends, skeptics alike. Also, I mailed out a ton of packets, but if anyone did not receive a packet and would like a free packet, 100% free, after this meeting, just message me or text me on the Q&A, the temp phone number that I'll be giving here in a moment. Or you can easily email me at creationhistory@yahoo.com. That's creationhistory@yahoo.com. And if you have any future questions, come see me at the History Museum in Eureka Springs, or my wife's coffee shop and art gallery at Reverie. Again, real quick, everyone should have gotten a packet. These would have been, we had it all sketched out really nice. It was going to be, my wife was going to have coffee, refreshments, the whole 9 yards. We had friends and people going to hand out the packets, meet and greet. But for those that requested it, they got a packet. And within the packet, it was a lot of different things from, does God exist? What's the schedule for this weekend? Again, it was going to have a map of the weekend event. The Case for Christ. We had books, DVDs, tons of different stuff within the pack. Dr. Sanford, who was also going to be with us, I'd hosted once before. Introduction by the speakers, as well as just a little bit of a summary, a great concept of intelligent design versus creation versus naturalism. What's the difference? And so within that, so if you didn't get a packet, definitely email me or text me, and I will get you one on the mail just to keep the conversation going. And again, really quickly, I've hosted a number of groups in different think tank organizations throughout about the last 15 years, from intelligent design to old Earth creationism to young Earth creationism to even friends like Dr. Subodh Pandit, who gives a fascinating. He is a young Earth creationist, but he definitely does a phenomenal job talking about his time in India, his 20-year search. He spent 10 years searching, okay, is there a God? And then he comes to the conclusion, yes, there has to be a God, and here's why. And then he spent another 10 years, okay, what God is it? And then he comes to the conclusion why it is the God of Christian theism. And let's see here. And again, this is really to encourage critical thinking, sharing of ideas, and obviously the concept of the objective truth behind Christian theism. I've written about it in my master's thesis. Different groups. I've debated different atheistic groups. No point in going into all that. But really, it is just to try to present to you a different case that you might not have heard before. And again, it's to encourage critical thinking. Dr. Humphreys and Dr. Baumgartner, they've long been some of the heroes, of mine and of a lot of Christians. As far as so, it's a real honor to host them. And even U.S. News Today. They describe Dr. Baumgartner as one of the best geophysicists in the world. Similarly, Dr. Humphreys, a nuclear physicist, has made many predictions, a lot of them, which you'll go into. He made predictions opposite of that of, say, groups like NASA. And guess what? NASA was wrong. He was right. Well, what was the difference? Well, he based his on a biblical model. So I think that that is interesting and worthy of dialogue. So again, I really envisioned, tonight being at a university setting where I do a little bit more. I don't know. I'm better live, I think. But also one thing that was in the works, of course, with COVID and everything, it got nixed. Was I was trying my best, just kind of as a little bit of an added bonus, and that was to get Kevin Sorbo, Hercules, Andromeda, God's Not Dead, to actually kick us off tonight. It was going to be a stretch regardless, but with the COVID thing, it really kind of put the the proverbial nail in the coffin. But definitely keep checking back, whether it be with myself, Stephen, IAC. Lord willing, next year maybe we'll get something put together. Let's see here. And with that, again, I want to just thank Stephen Policastro and International Association for Creation. Once we figured out that, everything started to fall apart with COVID and everything, I was on the verge of just postponing everything till next year. We decided, you know what, this is a good opportunity to actually stream this online, and then maybe postpone it to next year also. But still, why not go ahead and stream it online? There's a big opportunity. A lot of people are locked in their house, so what better way to go ahead and get it in front of more people? And again, I joked with Dr. Humphreys and Baumgartner, that they are boomers. I'm a Gen Xer, and we really needed a millennial to help pull together all the IT stuff. So again, thank you, Stephen and IAC, for kind of coming to that need. And lastly, I'd like to thank Logos Research Associates. Pretty easy to research them, logosresearchassociates.org, who Dr. Baumgartner and Humphreys both are researchers and whom I am affiliated with. Myself and even Stephen actually also spent a few wonderful days there last April in Utah, just being able to walk through, the Grand Staircase, a lot of these different things. Speaking with some of the, over 50 PhDs that are also creation scientists, just to kind of, look at our differences, look at our similarities, but also see some of this evidence firsthand. And I think it was very powerful. It was really an honor that they asked me to MC it. You're thinking about spinning the records. There wasn't any of that, but real quick, a little housekeeping before I introduce the speakers is we do have a temp number for you to text any questions to when we go through the Q&A. And Stephen and I will be going through those during the Q&A time period. That number is 479-616-4520. That's 479-616-4520. That number should be active through at least Monday. And again, if you want a packet, text it to that number or email me. And also, if you have any Q&A, I'm going to be kind of compiling those during the talks. So definitely send that to that as well. Again, tonight's talk is more geared toward a skeptical audience. Tomorrow's is to better equip Christians that not only is Christianity the strongest, intellectually that it's ever been, but also that naturalism is at its weakest. And again, it's really to help Christians get better plugged into apologetics, creation, and why our churches should be, first of all, should care and should be really involved in this in a ever increasingly skeptical world. 1 Peter 3:15. And so without further delay, I will introduce our speakers, and who are not only truly members of the Creation Science Hall of Fame, but they have continually adjusted their works. They have testable predictions, and based on their biblical models. And honestly, they've continued to develop them. I mean, they didn't, for example, Dr. Humphreys, in his phenomenal book, I graduated high school, not to give my age, but 1996. Well, this book came out in 1994. And again, I didn't grow up in a Christian home or where we went to church all the time. I think we went on Easter and Christmas. But yeah, and again, all my education, different degrees, have been through a secular university. And Starlight in Time, that really did kind of plant a seed where I said, you know what, that is fascinating. And the movie, I'm drawing a blank now. Anyway, the one with Matthew McConaughey, it kind of built on some of the work that Dr. Humphreys did as well. And again, I think it's good to get this in front of a larger audience. So tonight, the talks are really going to be focused on Dr. Humphreys tackling, in a nutshell, why I'm a creation scientist and why it's viable. And Dr. Humphreys is going to be focused more on why I'm not a Darwinist and why naturalism, yeah, I mean, let's just be honest, is bankrupt. I mean, it's 2020, and I think it's time for us to acknowledge that. So real quickly, we're going to have Dr. Humphreys speak. I'll then come back, introduce Dr. Baumgartner, and then we'll do Q&A. And then tomorrow, then we'll have Stephen kind of give us a little bit of a closing. And then tomorrow, it's going to be much more focused on, which I think is going to be phenomenal. Dr. Humphreys is going to focus on his third cosmology that he's developed. He'll explain it, long story short. And Dr. Baumgartner giving a good overview of his work in catastrophic plate tectonics. So real quickly, Dr. Humphreys is going to kick us off, and he is a nuclear physicist and a research scientist at Sandia National Laboratory. Dr. Humphreys was born in Michigan and was raised in a scientifically aware but non-Christian household. So not surprisingly, Humphreys himself always had a love for science, and in 1959, he was one of the 40 winners of the Westinghouse National Science Talent Search. He received his Bachelor's of Science degree in physics at Duke University, and after this, he moved to Louisiana State, LSU, to study a postgraduate in physics. And in 1969, while doing his dissertation for LSU in the mountains of Colorado, he committed his life to Christ. In 1972, he was awarded a PhD in physics on cosmic rays and ultra-high energy nucleon interactions, by which time he has fully convinced creationist. He'd become a fully convinced creationist due to both the biblical and scientific evidence. For the next 6 years, he worked in the high voltage laboratory of General Electric Company, designing and inventing equipment and researching high voltage phenomena. While there, he received a U.S. patent and one of Industrial Research Magazine's IR 100 awards. Dr. Humphreys has been married since 1963, has 3 kids. And on a personal note, again, I kind of commented on that earlier, but when I was finishing my master's, I really found Dr. Humphreys' time dilation model fascinating. And again, I began, some mild scenarios on black hole versus white hole versus simply a white hole-like cosmology or cosmogony. And surprisingly, I found his research, it's mathematically sound. And again, in the Q&A, show me where I'm in error. If I've got some of the equations written out, if I'm mistaken, please correct me. So again, I definitely am looking forward to tonight's talk. And again, sorry, I missed one point. Dr. Humphreys definitely has influenced some good theoretical physicists like Dr. John Harnett, Dr. Jason Lisle, astrophysicist, and many others that has really looked at this time dilation, this starlight in time problem. And I think it's some of the best answers we've seen pretty much ever. So I could go on, but without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Russell Humphreys.
I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay. Let's see if you see this. You should see a screen that says Evidence for a Young World and my name and Creation Research Society and nothing else. Is that what you're seeing? I hope. I'm not getting any feedback here.
Yes.
Okay.
That is
All
what
right.
we see. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
All right, here we go. I'm not really a nuclear physicist or an astrophysicist or a geophysicist. I'm none of and all of the above. I'm just sort of a general purpose physicist. And maybe the most important thing about what kind of physicist I am is I'm a retired physicist. But I did work 22 years at Sandia National Laboratories in New Mexico. And I've been interested ever since I got saved and started encountering evidence that the world is young. I've been interested in the age of the Earth. It's one of my it's the area where I thought I could contribute a little research. So next up is the bottom line of my talk tonight. The young world makes sense of both scripture and science. And by young, I mean thousands of years. And I think it's about 6,000 years, but it's not billions of years. So the first few slides of my talk will be what the Bible says on the issue, just 2 slides. And the rest will be scientific evidence. But first, here's what the Bible says about a young world. This is just one sample verse. This is my favorite. I hang my hat on this one, but there's lots of other verses. But it's the 4th commandment in the 10 commandments that Moses gave in Exodus. And he said, "For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth." And there you see on the tablets of stone over there, if you can see my cursor, that's Sheshet Yamim, 6 days. And he made the heavens and the earth. That's the Hebrew way of saying the whole universe. Now, what I like about this verse is its context is ordinary days, because before this verse it says, 6 days you, Israelites, he's talking to, 6 days you shall labor, and on the 7th day you shall rest. For in 6 days, same word, Jehovah made the whole universe. And then after this, it also says, therefore you shall keep the Sabbath day holy. Again, speaking to Israel. And so sandwiched in between 2 verses, which are obviously only ordinary days, ordinary length of days of the week, he says, for in 6 of those very same things, he made the universe. So it's a great context. And then I like what he didn't say, words he didn't use. This is the Hebrew word olam. If you can see my cursor, that's olam. You read it from right to left, and it means long time or eon. By the way, I'm not a Hebrew expert, but I can carry on a very rudimentary conversation with a Hebrew child. And I can read Hebrew, and so I know a little of it, but I'm not an expert. So, but olam would have been a great word for him to use. He could have said, you work 6 days, and on the 7th you rest. For in 6 olamim, or 6 ages or eons, he made the heavens and the earth. But he didn't say that. He didn't use that. Or he could have said something like la elef dor. That means to the 1000th generation. So if a generation is 20 years, then that would be 20,000 years. But he didn't say that. And then the third line there of Hebrew is Elef, Elephai Ravavot Shanim, which is thousands of tens of thousands of years. And that works out to 10 million to 1 billion years. So there's a way he could say billions of years. but he didn't say any of that. So I think that's very significant too. So now, there are many other scriptures. This is just one example. And it's not just in Genesis or in Exodus like this. It's also in the New Testament. And here's my favorite New Testament verse. Jesus Christ implies the world is young. He said in his famous discourse on divorce and marriage, he starts it off by saying, "But from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female." And so that first beginning of the creation, that's the first day of creation. I'm going to put a little magnifying glass there. So, and then God made them male and female. That's verse 26 of the first chapter, on the sixth day of creation. So Jesus is kind of stretching the word beginning from the first day all the way across to the sixth day. And he's saying mankind has been around since the beginning of the universe. So that's a large percentage of the whole time that has happened since then. 4,000 years from the creation to Christ, and 2,000 more years till now. That's what I think the Hebrew text chronologies tell you. But we've been here all of that time, from the beginning of the universe. But the evolutionist says that we've only been here a very tiny fraction of time, only the last 200,000 years out of 13 billion, or maybe more, 13 billion years. So we've only been here a short time. But Jesus' statement doesn't seem to make any room for that. There's no room left for the long ages. There are many other scriptures that are somewhat like this, that imply a young creation, a young universe. So, all right, that's why it's important. The scripture is pretty clear if you just take the words at face value, straightforwardly, that the whole universe is young and not billions of years. So it's important, because if science says something else, then scripture would be wrong. So now, but science has a surprise. This is one of the things that really surprised me, that most of these dating methods give a young world. And this is just a portion of a list that I compiled. And I'm going to tell you later on where you can get a list like this online with 101 pieces of evidence and explanations and references for each piece of evidence. But the shocking thing to me was that 90% of these methods that you can estimate the age of the world, 90% give you a young world, at least if you take things at first sight, at face value. And only 10% are the ones that you're familiar with, the nuclear dating methods and the cosmologies. How did the light get here from distant galaxies, and how long did it take? Those things you're probably familiar with, the 10% of old ones. But tonight, I'll talk about several of that 10%, some of the prominent ones, and show you some new insights about that. But the shocker to me, that most of the evidence points to a young world. So I've been getting adjusted to that shock for about 50 years, been collecting data like this for 50 years. So now here's some documentation of some of the items. There's a pamphlet online and also in your packet that has this title, Evidence for a Young World. I think your pamphlet looks different. It's an earlier version. I'm not sure if it has exactly the same numbering and the same items, all of the same items. But if you don't have that packet, you can order this this one, Evidence for a Young World, from on the internet. So there are publication and internet references on the back pages of the pamphlet, and you can go to icr.org and look at their archive of impact articles. This is a series of articles called Impacts, and they have an archive, and this one is in the June 2005 issue, impact number 384. So, but you can also get this information in other places, and I'll tell you how to get that online later on. Okay, now here's item number 1 from the brochure. Galaxies wind themselves up too fast. Now, if you can see my cursor over on the picture of this picture of Andromeda Galaxy, this one is about 2 million light years away from us. In the northern hemisphere, we can see it as a blurred patch and a really clear dark night sky. But it's an island of stars, about several hundred billion stars, and it's 100,000 light years across. And this one's pretty much like our own galaxy, maybe a little different. But I should tell you what a light year is. A light year is a unit of distance, not of time. It's 6 trillion miles. So 100,000 of those light years across the galaxy. And our galaxy is very much like this one. Now, the stars in a galaxy, we can measure how fast they're moving from their spectrographic information. Doesn't matter how. And we can tell how fast they're moving. But the outer stars of a galaxy and our own galaxy move around slowly around the galaxy. But as you move in, the gravity gets greater. And if you just follow the ordinary laws of gravity, you get things rotating much faster in the interior than in the exterior. So you see these spiral arms in the galaxy. Those spiral arms tend to lag behind the rotation. And as the galaxy turns around fast in the interior, it winds itself up like a clock spring. So the speeds are so fast that the spiral would become a featureless disk in only several hundred million years, or a few tenths of a billion years. What the problem with that is that our galaxy and all our nearby ones are supposed to be about 10 billion years old. Billion with a B. And so, but if our galaxy and Andromeda had started off as a straight bar of stars, then that bar would have wound itself up into its present shape in less than 3/10 of a billion years. Now, astronomers have known about this winding up dilemma for quite a while, since the 1930s. And they've had several theories, and they have one now called density wave theory. But it's never worked too well. The density wave theory doesn't work too well past one rotation. And the Whirlpool galaxy, for any example, has many, many turns. And it's just impossible for the density wave theory to explain that. So the simple view of it is that we're seeing a galaxy that's less than 3/10 of a billion years old, and it's quite a bit less than it's supposed to be. So something's wrong with our picture of the timing. Okay, that's way out in the universe. The next item in the brochure is in our own solar system. Oh, by the way, tomorrow I'll talk about my third cosmology, and all of my cosmologies and every other creationist cosmologies are designed to show a way that God could have gotten light from distant stars here very fast, so that the universe can be young, as the Bible says. So anyhow, the next item is in our own solar system. That's pamphlet item number 3. Comets crumble too quickly. Now, the astronomer Fred Whipple said that comets are dirty snowballs, and they are in orbit, supposed to be in orbit in a cloud called the Oort cloud, O-O-R-T, and also in a belt called the Kuiper belt around our solar system. And these dirty snowballs, every now and then, something happens, they run into one another or collide with something else, and one of them comes into the solar system. That's the theory. Problem is, no one's ever seen the Oort cloud, and you need the Oort cloud to feed comets into the Kuiper belt. So the theory is a little shaky there. We should be able to see the cloud, but we haven't. Anyhow, a dirty snowball comes in close, orbits close to the sun, and loses 5 or 10% of its material every pass around the sun. So astronomers even seen them break up into pieces as they go around the sun. So at this rate, they couldn't last more than 100,000 years, and some of the comets are on short orbits and rotate around the sun fairly quickly, and those couldn't last more than 10,000 years. So the comets and the solar system are supposed to be 5 billion years old. The lifetime of comets in our solar system is less than 10,000 years. There's this theory called the Oort cloud theory that doesn't have evidence for it. And even if they imagine any number of snowballs out there at any distance, they can't explain the number of comets that we see in our solar system. So a lot of secular astronomers, I know one who told me he doesn't believe in the Oort cloud theory at all. So the simple explanation is that the solar system is less than 10,000 years old. Okay, next item is more down to earth yet. Pamphlet item number 4. Seafloor mud accumulates too fast. By the way, all of these things are not real complicated things. It just is a matter of digging out the numbers from the textbooks and from the secular science literature. But there's no flag in the literature to tell you that this is an indicator of a young world. So mud accumulates too fast on the seafloor. Where does it come from? Rain, rivers, and wind, like dust storms. And about 20 billion tons per year of mud enter the ocean. Now, the only way to get, and the other thing is that the mud accumulates. If you spread out the mud uniformly from shore to shore, it would be about 400 meters thick. That's not a lot of mud, actually, compared to the depth of the ocean. So the only known way to get rid of this mud is by plate tectonic subduction. If you can see my cursor, this tectonic plate is going to the left, and centimeters per, a few centimeters per year. And if all of that 400 meters of mud slid under the continent with the plate, then you would get rid of about 1 billion tons per year, maybe 2 billion if you try real hard to imagine scenarios. So 20 billion tons going in, 1 billion or so tons going out every year. So it would only take 12 million years, 12 M with a M as in mother, million years, not billions of years. Now, the problem with that is that this process of plate tectonic subduction, erosion of the continents, and the ocean existing are supposed to have been going on for 3 billion years, B as in boy. So 3 billion divided by 12 million is 250 times too small. So really, if the seas were 3 billion years old, the oceans would be choked with dozens of kilometers of mud. And we don't see that. Now, the Genesis flood could do all this within 1 year, about 4,500 years ago. Water eroding off the continent can easily dump as much mud as we see there. So the 12 million is the maximum age, but that's way too small. But the true age is probably 4,500 years for the mud. So the next item, pamphlet item number 5, is also related to the ocean. The sea is not salty enough. Now, why is that a problem? Well, that same erosion that erodes rivers and mud and dumps mud into the ocean also erodes rocks and dumps various elements into the ocean, including the elements that make up salt, sodium and chlorine. And geoscience journals tabulate how much sodium is going into the ocean, about 450 million tons per year. There are also ways for the sodium to get out of the ocean, like in salt spray. You've smelled salt spray. That's sodium that has come out of the ocean. And if you go to the literature and compile all the ways sodium can get out, only about 120 million tons every year gets out. So only 1/3 of what goes in gets out every year. And at that rate, it would accumulate salt rapidly. And if things happened according to the way that evolutionists and secular geoscientists want, if their scenarios for the past are true, then at those rates of accumulation of sodium in the ocean, the age of the ocean would be at most 62 million years. That's 50 times younger than that 3 billion years they want. Now again, the flood could do it in a much shorter time. So the Genesis flood would make it much younger, and most of the salt in the ocean has probably only been there since the flood, and that would be about, according to the Bible, about 4,500 years ago. Dr. Steve Austin and I did a technical paper that's referenced in the booklet. It's reference 10, and it got second prize at the 1990 International Conference on Creationists. We challenged, Steve and I challenged geochemists. Geochemists specialize in this kind of stuff, including one new at Sandia National Laboratories, to produce counter data, and they couldn't. So there's another strong indicator that the world is young. Next item, number 6, is something all around us, the Earth's magnetic field. The magnetic field of the Earth is that invisible force that makes compass needles point north. And otherwise, you can't feel it, and it doesn't do very much, but it's there. And the Earth's magnetic field is losing energy too fast. So this is a picture of Earth's core, and in Earth's core, there is an electric current. So take a look at the simulation. 6 billion amperes, actually, circulating westward in the conducting molten metal of the Earth's core. And since that molten metal has electrical resistance, the current runs down, slows down, sort of like a flywheel spinning and friction slowing the flywheel down. So does this electric current diminish with time because of electrical resistance. And we've measured this. It's been measured by secular scientists, and I compiled the data in the Creation Research Society Quarterly, and showed that the current and the magnetic field are losing energy at this rate, about half its energy every 1,400 years. Now, if you go backward in time, doubling the energy of the current and the amount of current every 1,400 years, you can't go too far back in time before you get to unreasonable things happening, such as melting parts of the earth that are now solid. So that gives you a maximum age of about 20,000 years. But the evidence is that the Earth's magnetic field reversed itself rapidly during the 1 year of the Genesis flood about 4,500 years ago, about 100 times in 1 year. And we've got evidence. Secular scientists have found evidence that these reversals happen very fast. But the only theory for the reversals that I know of is one that I made. And it says that the reversals would chew up energy. So the magnetic field and the electric current lost energy faster during the reversals in the Genesis flood. And that shortens the age it could be to as little as 6,000 years. Now, there's a recent book that I and an engineer friend of mine, Mark Despain, wrote, Earth's Mysterious Magnetism, and it has much more, and it's not only of the Earth, but that of other celestial orbs. And it's there are no equations in the book. It's not technical, but there's a lot of technical detail. So even if you're a liberal arts major, you can master this, but it will be a little bit of work for you. So, anyhow, it has a lot of interesting things, including the magnetic fields of planets in the solar system and of the sun and so on. So this is available at creationresearch.org or creation.com or Amazon. Okay, the next item is a relatively new sort of item to this argument. It's about living beings, pamphlet item number 8. And the bottom line of it is that biological material mutates or decays too fast. Now, in a lot of this, you'll need to know what happens to DNA after a creature dies. DNA is rather fragile. DNA is let's say that molecular size blueprint for the whole body of a creature, and it's in each cell in the nucleus, and in another place called the mitochondria. And the cells have to keep maintaining and repairing the DNA chains because it's very fragile. And so once an organism dies, there's nothing to maintain the DNA, and it tends to fall apart. Now, even if you put the DNA into a refrigerator and freeze it in amber, for example, and keep water away from it and keep germs away from it, it will still fall apart by itself. And secular scientists have found that after about 10,000 years, there's just not much of it left. So I don't know how many of you heard of mitochondrial Eve back in the late 90s. That was the DNA in our mitochondria, the little energy organelles in the cell, and we inherit them only from our mother. And so they put together a family tree of the different, using the different mutations they found in people alive today, and stitched together a family tree going back into time to see if they could trace it back. And they traced it back to one single woman. And at the time, in the late 1990s, they were thinking that this woman existed 200,000 years ago because there were so many mutations to account for, and they had a theoretical number for how fast the mutations in mitochondrial DNA happened. And so they got 200,000. But when they started looking at actual mutation rates, the mutation rates were faster. And they said, in fact, one issue of Science, the journal Science, not a creationist journal, January 2nd, 1998, said that mitochondrial Eve could be as, her age could be as low as 6,000 years. So let's scratch out 200,000 years and put 6,000 years in for her. Now, DNA in amber, the particular one I looked at, was from a creature that was 135 million years old, and yet there was still plenty of DNA in it. Bit like the DNA that oh well, I won't talk about that movie. Yes, I will. Jurassic Park had this scenario where they extracted blood from a mosquito in amber and then reconstructed the DNA in the blood from the mosquito, thinking that it would be that the mosquito had taken blood from a dinosaur. So they cloned some dinosaurs. Great scenario, but they can't quite do that, but they can check the DNA of the mosquito itself. And that DNA seems to be quite well preserved in many cases. So since DNA goes away under the best of conditions after 10,000 years, the amber that's supposed to be 135 million years old is really less than 10,000 years old. From a deep layer called the Permian stratum, there were bacteria found in salt deposits that are supposed to be 250 million years old, but they were perfectly happy. They not only had intact DNA, it was working DNA, and yet the radiation in that salt dome would have torn up the bacterial DNA, just the radiation by itself, if nothing else. So again, we'll put 10,000 years as an upper limit for it. Neanderthal, one specimen, they completely reconstructed his genome from blood on a rock that was supposed to be about 40,000 years old, and it seemed to be perfectly good DNA. So let's put less than 10,000 years for that too. Dinosaur blood cells. You've heard about these about a decade ago from a dino that was supposed to be about 70 million years old, and yet the blood cells were perfectly well preserved. So let's just say that dino and his bones and his blood cells were less than 10,000 years old also. And a few years ago, more dino blood cells and soft tissue were found and reported in the journal Science, 12th of June, 2015. So there's much more about this stuff in a recent issue of the Creation Research Society Quarterly, spring 2005. And it talks about soft tissue and fossils. And that soft tissue has been measured to have a half-life in the thousands of years. There's carbon-14 in the fossils. Nice article in the same issue about that. Lots of good stuff in it. And you can buy that issue especially just by itself at creationresearch.org in their online bookstore. It's called the iDino Project Special Report, spring 2015. So, all right. So there's much more of this evidence, and it's coming to being unearthed every day, biological evidence that living creatures have not been around here millions of years, but only thousands of years. So Now, the next item is fairly simple. It's about people. We all understand people. Well, we're talking about dead people. Not enough Stone Age graves. This is pamphlet item number 12. Now, if you can see my cursor, the vertical axis of this graph is the amount of people living on the earth at any given time, the human population. And here I've marked off 1 million. This level would be 1 million. And then over here, the arrow on the right, about where the letter T is, would be our present day. And then we go back about 5,000 years and go back another 195,000 years. And we get to supposedly the first Homo sapiens couple existing. And so they would multiply rapidly, but evolutionary anthropologists think that they wouldn't, that the curve of population growth would flatten out. So it would rise rapidly and then flatten out. Why? Because of the limited food available for hunting and gathering lifestyle. The evolutionary anthropologists think that during the Stone Age, when people were using stone tools instead of metal tools, they didn't have agriculture, so that limited the amount of food people could have, and the population would be, according to them, between 1 million people alive on Earth at any time to 10 million. And I'm using the smaller number because that benefits them in this little analysis. So then you have agriculture, farming discovered about 5,000 to 10,000 years ago, and the population takes off to our 6 billion or so that we now have. And by the way, it's possible to get 6 billion people from Adam, not from Adam, but from Noah, from his 3 sons and their wives, easily in 5,000 years at a reasonable rate of growth. But I'm not concerned with that right now. I'm concerned with how many people died in the Stone Age. And if you do the numbers, they're fairly simple. It works out to about 8 billion graves. So the Stone Age people buried their dead. They didn't leave them on the ground to be chewed up by animals. They didn't burn them very often. And they buried them with artifacts and implements, stone axes and beads and things like that. So even if all the people disappeared from the graves by rotting during that time, the artifacts would still be there and evidence of the graves would still be there. How many we actually see of Stone Age graves is in the thousands, about 3,000 at most. And that points to a Stone Age that was only hundreds of years long, not thousands of years. And that fits in pretty well with the biblical scenario of an instant Stone Age after the scattering of people from Babel into a developing ice age. So anyhow, so the next item is really very obvious. It was obvious to me as an unsaved teenager. It bothered me. And that is that written history is too short. Now, here, if you see my cursor on the left vertical axis again, this is number of printed or written documents, let's say. And it's billions near the top, millions in the middle, and thousands here, and down to 1 at different times. And along the bottom, we have time now on the right, and then the time of Christ here, and then time of Abraham here, and the time of Noah. So let's start at now, where we've got billions of written documents, and we'll work our way back in time down to where we only have 1 document. So just take a look at that. This is just a rough guess, but it's got to be something like that. So it runs into here, this would represent Noah's logbook aboard the ark, or maybe he had a whole library. So anyhow, but roughly about that time. And what we have, if you divorce written documents from legends and just use the time of the written documents, we have about 5,000 years. And one might argument that give or take 1,000 or so years for the documents. But remember, Ice Age man is supposed to have been around nearly 200,000 years ago. And he recorded phases of the moon on bone, and he made beautiful cave paintings. So why not, in 200,000 years sometime, use the same skills to record history? You could draw little paintings of what your tribe did to the neighboring tribe, how you conquered them, or anyhow, you could start recording history. So why not then, in all that time, 200,000 years, use the same skills to record history? So something's wrong with the time scale of history. So let's summarize this 90% type of evidence. This is, most dating methods say the world is young, the 90%. And at this conference, I've talked about galaxies, comets, sea salt, seafloor mud, magnetic field of the earth, helium, Stone Age graves, and history too short. These are still just samples. There are many more, and I've just sort of started itemizing some of them. Rapid burial of fossils, fast hardening of rocks, titans, methane loss, the erosion at the Niagara Falls. I'm not going to read all of these for you. These are, and many people want to see the whole list, know where they can get it. So here's where you can get it. At creation.com. It has more evidence. That's a good website, by the way. Lots of good articles in it, written by scientists, that edited very clearly so that they're understandable. I think you'll find it a good resource, especially if you're a student. So now, this article is entitled 101 Evidences for a Young Age of the Earth. And if you take 101 evidences and plug it into the search engine, you'll find this article. And so there's a paragraph or two about each item of evidence and references on the internet and in the secular literature. All right. Now, this is the 90% of the evidence. This is all young Earth evidence here. What about the 10% of the evidence? What about carbon dating and all that stuff? Well, this is item number 11 from the pamphlet. The first thing you need to know is that fossils should have no carbon-14. Evolutionists believe this. There should be no carbon-14 in fossils. Why? Because carbon-14 has a relatively short half-life of 5,700 years. So if you start with a pound of carbon-14 now, wait 5,700 years, you're down to a half pound. Wait another 5,700 years and you're down to a quarter pound. You can't do that too long before you run out of carbon-14 atoms. And so there should be no carbon-14 left in any normal size fossil after 500,000 years. So that's a pretty long time, isn't it? Well, all the fossils are below the Ice Age, and they're supposed to be, or at least the ones embedded in stone, they're supposed to be between 2 million and 560 million years old. So we would say, well, that's way longer than 500,000 years. So there shouldn't be a single carbon-14 atom left in any fossil, right? No carbon-14, really? Is that really so? The answer is no. Here's a trade secret. I call it a trade secret. It's becoming known because creationists are publicizing it. But the trade secret is that all the fossils that have been tested for carbon-14 contain carbon-14. This is from the carbon dating technical journals themselves. Different materials: coal, wood, shell, bone, marble, natural gas, carbon dioxide, calcite, and oil. They all contain significant amounts of carbon-14. So the age in years of these fossils is, the conventional age is millions to hundreds of millions, up to 560 million for that trilobite in the upper right corner. But the standard carbon-14 age that we'd calculate from what's in the fossils is about 50,000 years, give or take 20,000. So that's the standard carbon-14 age calculated from the standard assumptions that go into the calculation. If you correct those assumptions for what the Genesis flood would do, then you shorten the ages to about 5,000 years. So what the carbon-14 is saying is that all over the world, at every depth, the age is about 5,000 years, and these are in waterborne strata. All of them are, were strata that were once mud or something like that, and hardened into rock. And all these fossils are in that kind of strata. And so it certainly looks like there was some kind of water catastrophe that buried billions of fossils, living things, formerly living things, and they all have a carbon-14 date of about 5,000 years, which is about the biblical date for the flood. So I say about, it could be give or take 2,000 years, 5,000, give or take 2,000 years, but it's certainly not millions. So carbon-14 is affirming that a global flood happened. So carbon-14 is now the creationist friend. It was once the flagship of the other side, and now it's the creationist friend. Okay, what about those billion-year dating methods, the ones that don't give you thousands of years at all, like carbon-14 does, but give you billions of years? I'm going to talk about one right here. This is pamphlet item number 10. Helium leakage from radioactive minerals deflates the billions of years idea that we get from radioactivity dating. This is a site near Los Alamos, New Mexico, and they drilled 3 miles deep and took borehole samples out of that, and we obtained it. It was mostly a granite-like material, and in it there's a black mica. You often see this in granite, a black mica called biotite. And embedded in the biotite are tiny little microscopic crystals of zirconium silicate, microscopic zircon crystals. And we selected some that were about 60 microns, millionths of a meter. A millionth of a meter is about the size of a germ, a bacterium. So these are 60 bacteria lengths long. And by the way, the zircons of zirconium silicate, people think of cubic zirconias. That's zirconium oxide, but zirconium silicate is the biblical jacinth, if you look it up in the Bible, or some other names for it in there. But zircons are radioactive. Why? Because they contain quite a bit of uranium for their size. They absorb uranium when they're formed from a molten rock. As they crystallize, they grab uranium atoms, and a lot of them. And they reject the eventual descendant of uranium decay, which is lead. They reject lead. The lead atoms don't fit into the lattice that well. So it's an ideal sort of little laboratory for nuclear decay. So they're radioactive. Let's take a close look at radioactivity in a zircon. Uranium decay makes helium and lead. So over on the left, here you see this represents a single uranium-238 atom, the most common type of uranium. And it decays through 8 steps down to lead-206. And I'm just going to illustrate those steps. But every time in one of those steps, it emits an alpha particle. An alpha particle is the nucleus of a helium atom. And the nucleus goes out in the crystal and sometimes out of the crystal. But wherever it stops, it grabs 2 electrons and becomes a full-fledged helium atom. So when a uranium-238 decays to lead-206, you get 8 heliums produced. If you can see my simulation there. So if we see lead in a crystal, lead-206 in particular, we know how many helium atoms were produced, and we know from the size of the crystal how many of those should have been deposited within the crystal. For this size crystal, it's about half of all the emissions. So now if you compute the age according to the standard rates of measure, assuming today's slow rate of decay of uranium-238 to lead-206, you get an age in these particular crystals of 1.5 billion years. And we got that age, and also Los Alamos National Labs, which did a lot of research at that same site, got for the zircons. So 1.5 billion years worth of nuclear decay happening. So, now helium is a small, slippery sort of atom. It doesn't attach itself chemically to anything. And it's small, so it's fast moving, and it can wiggle out of a crystal lattice and leak completely out of the crystal. So helium can leave the zircon. But much helium is still in the zircons that we looked at. So here you see a chart, and this is the borehole, and this is the depth on the left column, 0.5 mile on down to 2.5 miles. And then the temperature of that granite-like stuff is fairly high, 95 degrees C at 0.5 mile on up to 277 degrees C at 2.5 miles. And yet the percentage helium that's retained by the crystals, the amount we know had to be deposited in them originally versus how much is there, and these are the numbers you see. So the 0.5 mile depth, 80% of the helium was still there. And down at the bottom, 0.1% of the helium was there. So the hotter the crystal got, the hotter the crystals were there in the formation, the more helium leaked out. That's typical of a process that's called diffusion. And the hotter the surroundings are, the faster the diffusion is. And you could just think of that as leaking. So some helium leaked out of this. So how fast did the helium leak? Well, we commissioned an experiment by the world's greatest expert on helium leakage, helium diffusion in geological minerals. His name is Kenneth Farley out at, I forget, I think he was at UCLA. I forget where he was, maybe Stanford. Anyhow, we commissioned him to look at some zircons that we found. And so he measured the leak rates at those various temperatures in the formation. He measured the leak rates of the crystals we gave him. And So if you essentially, roughly speaking, divide the amount of helium lost out of the crystal by the measured heat rates, let's see, here's the losses, here's the leak rates, and if you divide the one by the other, you get a date of about 6,000 years, plus or minus 2,000. The exact numbers were 5,681 plus or minus 1,999. So I've rounded those off. I did not plan on such a clear result. I was surprised by this. So this is a very remarkable result. It's 1.5 billion years worth of nuclear decay occurred within the last 6,000 years. So that points to some period in the past when God speeded up the rate of nuclear decay. So it produced a large amount of helium in a short time, and that helium did not have much time to leak out. We presented this at the American Geophysical Union annual meeting in December 2003 in San Francisco, and it was in their proceedings. These results are documented in a technical book called The Radioisotopes and the Age of the Earth, or RATE, Rate Results, Volume 2. These are our results of this Young Earth Creationist Research Initiative. And so you can get this book. Now, it's highly technical, I warn you, but it's online for free at icr.org/RATE. So go to the bottom of the page, and the bottom is volume 2 of all the resource materials. And this is a heavy-duty book. You can use it to impress your friends and pretend that you've read it. But it does have all the gory details, not only of this project on the helium, but several other projects, and I'm going to tell you about one of those projects in a moment. Now, there's a layman's book that explains the rate results called Thousands, ... not billions of years, of course, Challenging an Icon of Evolution, Questioning the Age of the Earth, by Dr. Don DeYoung. He was on the RATE project. He's a physicist, and he's also a very good writer of popular science books. Reader, very good. So highly readable. So if you want to know about all of the results of the RATE project, this is the book for you. Thousands, not billions. And you can get it at creationresearch.org, their bookstore, or amazon.com. Okay, in conclusion, it's a young world after all. So the data for youth heavily outweighs the data for age. So on the left side, we have a lot of young world evidence. On the right side, we have carbon-14 and some of the other, uranium to lead decay and other old Earth evidence. But the RATE data explains these nuclear decay dating ages pretty well. So take a look at what happens with carbon-14 on the right. It's switched sides to the left. Changes sides, it's a turncoat. And then the other old Earth data, we've taken it off the scale, at least some of it. There's lots of other old Earth techniques and methods that we're still working on, but we think this is pretty strong evidence that you can trust the Bible, because the Bible's time scale is the most doubted thing about it. If you can trust it, you can trust the Bible. And remember that verse, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, Exodus 20:11. So here's some websites that for you to remember. And now I think I'll stop sharing, and we'll go on to the next part of the presentations. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Humphreys. Like I said, it would be, I'm envisioning the university setting, like I said, where I invited the geology departments, the astronomy departments, the biological departments, you know, hearing this. So I'm hoping that, again, by it being live, we actually get it to a larger audience. But again, I think that Dr. Humphrey's opening remarks, I've gotten a lot of good Q&A. Please keep them coming. I've been compiling them over here. But I think this is really good stuff. And like I said, don't forget the email, creationhistory@yahoo.com, or text me, 479-616-4520. Like I said, we've got a lot of good information, whether it be distant starlight and time, which is actually a great conversation, kind of going back and forth between Dr. Humphreys and Dr. John Harnett. Again, I've got about, looks like about maybe 15 copies of the original 1994 Starlight in Time. Again, I'd hosted Dr. John Sanford once upon a time. He wasn't, he may be in the actually listening, but the mystery of our declining genes, which Dr. Bumgarner may touch on, and then really more tomorrow. But again, planetary cataclysm, John Bumgarner. Again, lots of material here. Similarly, in everybody's packet who requested one, Dr. John Sanford's How Darwin Got It Wrong. And again, I've lost count of how many groups I've talked to in the past, as far as saying, look, I'm not skeptical of Darwinism because I'm a Christian theist. Even if I wasn't a Christian, I would still be an agnostic. I mean, there's no way I could buy into neo-Darwinism. There's just no reason, there's no proof, there's no evidence, as Dr. Bumgarner is going to touch on here in his next talk. Again, I've gotten a ton of these books I was going to send out. I was going to give out, if it had been a live event, Atheism on Trial. And again, Dr. Marcos here makes a very compelling case to say, look, all of these warmed up atheistic arguments, it's the same thing that we've always seen. And I don't know how many atheist groups I've talked to, whether it be on the event of cosmology, cosmogony, biology, geophysics, anything. In 2020, all of the evidence that I'm aware of is on the side of Christian theism. We're not talking about, during the time of Bertrand Russell, Anthony Flew, who were very respectable atheists, and to where it was maybe 70% on the side of Christian theism, 30% at the time, what we thought we knew, on the side of Christianity versus atheism. In 2020, practically 100% of the evidence is on the side of the Christian theist. And again, like I said, everybody should have gotten a copy of these. Let's see, Dr. John Bumgarner. Again, we'll talk about more of this tomorrow as far as catastrophic plate tectonics. But Dr. Andrew Snelling. I mean, this is just volume 2, but over 1,000 pages of geology, creation, and the flood. A lot of people that I'm aware of in different circles have constantly said, "Oh, James, you give too much credit to creationism." And I've pushed back to say, well, why is that? Why do you believe that's the case? And I think Dr. Humphreys just gave a lot of good cases for that, and I think Dr. Bumgarner is about to give a bunch more. But without further ado, Dr. John Bumgarner is a PhD geophysicist, also the vice president of Logos Research Associates. His bachelor's was in electrical engineering, his master's also in electrical engineering and geophysics and space physics. And his PhD was also in geophysics and space physics. He earned his doctorate for the express purpose of addressing the tectonic issue of the Genesis flood at a professional level. And for his PhD thesis, he developed a 3D mantle dynamics program known as Terra. A research scientist for over 20 years at Los Alamos National Laboratories, he used computer modeling to explore and develop the concept of catastrophic plate tectonics as a primary mechanism behind the flood as recorded in Genesis. Also, while at Los Alamos, he assisted the German Weather Service in applying modeling techniques used with Terra to the task of developing their next generation global weather forecast model. This model, named GME, became the German operational global forecast model in the year 2000, and is currently used in more than 20 countries. Dr. Baumgartner further applied his expertise in numerical methods in the development of Mendel's Accountant, a population genetics program for modeling mutation and selection. Current research includes the refinement of Terra to accommodate much stronger variations in rock strength and thereby achieve a greater fidelity in modeling the runaway aspects of the flood cataclysm. And again, one thing that I just kind of want to point out, I hear a lot of people always make the comment, whether it be intelligent design, creationism, that it doesn't make predictions. Well, that's absolutely false. As Dr. Humphreys has accounted and will account more tomorrow, from a cosmological standpoint, it makes all kinds of models that naturalism does not. Naturalism, as I have written in different accounts, shameless plug, does not make pretty much any predictions, whereas the creation model or the intelligent design model does, and it's testable, as Dr. Humphreys and Baumgartner both have alluded to. And one thing that I would encourage everyone to check out as far as Dr. Baumgartner goes is the website www.globalflood.org. Pretty easy to remember, globalflood.org. And in this, you will see a peer-reviewed selection that I think is just extraordinary, in that it shows from 1984, from when he first really started to put together this CPT model. It shows each, every year, every 2 years, it changing, it becoming better through peer review, and that it is a very Loctite example of how creation science has advanced the sciences holistically. And I know that Earth Science magazine, which is secular, I should have brought a copy, but I think it was roughly 2014. But they made a comment on the cover, creationism sneaks into geology. And it was talking about how, well, yeah, it does seem like they do have some really good arguments, and it left it at that. Well, they have good arguments because the arguments are good. And so again, I just encourage you to review globalflood.org. Definitely during the Q&A, blow Dr. Humphreys and Baumgartner out of the water if what they're saying is pseudoscience. But with that, like I said, I encourage you to keep the questions coming. I've been documenting them here, and we will go through the Q&A after Dr. Baumgartner's talk, and we'll go much more into the specifics of not only Dr. Humphreys' latest cosmology, but also Dr. Baumgartner's CPT theory, which is honestly fascinating, and it really does give credence back to the Genesis account. So without further ado, Dr. Baumgartner's talk tonight will be on why Darwinism is fraudulent, just to be very blunt, and tomorrow he will discuss more on the developments of catastrophic plate tectonics and what that means, and why us as Christians should take the utmost confidence in the biblical model. So Dr. Baumgartner, the floor is yours.
Needed to unmute my mic. It's a delight to be with everyone tonight. I'm not sure what the audience is, how many hundreds of people are tuned in, but it's a great new way for doing conferences. We're not restricted to the size of the auditorium with this online venue, and so I'm hearing that there are people in many places outside the U.S. that are tuning in right now. So I'm excited about what I'm going to share tonight. Actually, I've been giving this message for a long time. I've amped it up a little as far as the little bit of the rhetoric, as you'll see in the title. So let me get my share my screen. Let's see here, and bring up my PowerPoint. So are you, which screen? I've got two screens. Are you seeing the main screen? What are you seeing? I can't determine that.
Hey, Dr. Baumgartner, Stephen here, just coming on to help you out a little bit. So if you can click the share screen at the bottom there, I don't see a screen appearing on the dashboard yet, but once it does, I will definitely add it into the video feed.
Okay.
So if you could try resharing your screen.
Okay. I thought I clicked it, but I will try it again. All right. Did that?
Yes, that worked. We see your panoramic shot of a valley.
Okay. How's that? Did that?
We see your first slide, so you're good to go.
All right. So tonight's topic is why evolution is blatant science fraud. We all around us, we see just incredible organisms. We see tiny insects like this horsefly, striped horsefly, with the eyes here, and to imagine all the circuitry, each individual eye going into its nervous system to be able to process the visual field. How does this work? Well, molecular biology research over the past 7 decades has revealed that life relies on nanotechnology taken to the limit, to the level of the individual atom, to allow this kind of miniaturization, allow these kind of systems to exist. And it's been well documented that all living organisms rely on astonishing diversity of miniature machines, each typically consisting of a few specialized protein molecules. This is an example of one of these machines. It's a biped motor protein known as kinesin, and the circle at the top is a container that this little robot is transporting, walking along part of the structure of the cell known as a microtubule. This is another representation of that robot with a large transport vesicle walking along the microtubule. And these robots are a key part of a UPS-like delivery system that exists in in cells. Just to give you an idea of how dense the microtubules are, this is a slide of some monkey liver cells where the microtubule network is stained red, the cell nuclei are stained blue. So if you can imagine, there are literally thousands upon thousands of these little robots carrying containers around from one part of the cell to the other. Another example of a cellular machine I want to briefly look at is known as ATP synthase. I'll explain what the name is all about in a moment. It's a rotary machine that recycles the chemical energy currency called ATP that powers most of the other cellular machines, such as the biped robots we just saw. It's this little rotary machine spins at something like 10,000 RPM. It's driven electrically by a flow of protons, and this machine exists in every form of life on Earth, from bacteria to humans. This is a little representation of that machine. You can see the little dots at the top, which are the protons, hydrogen atoms that go through the machine and give up their energy to make it turn. The center part of this machine turns. The bottom part has got catalytic activity, and it enables this machine to turn what is called ADP, adenosine diphosphate, adds back a phosphate unit to turn it into the ATP molecule, which is the main energy currency in the cell. Our cells, most of our cells contain many thousands, up to hundreds of thousands of these rotary machines. The amount of ATP recycled in our bodies per day is approximately equal to our body weight. So we have about 1.5 ounces of ATP in our bodies. It gets recycled about once a minute, and you multiply together, and that roughly corresponds to your body weight. You weigh 160 pounds, your body recycles roughly 160 pounds of ATP every day. So it's a major process in our bodies. This is what the ATP molecule looks like. And you can see the 3 phosphate units, and it's the last one that comes off to give up the energy that most cellular processes utilize to perform the task that they perform. These ATP synthase machines are inside little organelles in the cell known as mitochondria. And this is a cross-section of a single mitochondrion. The little gold dots represent these ATP synthase machines. And these mitochondria are sort of the energy factories in our cells. And cells that require lots of energy, like muscle cells, especially heart muscle cells, can have on the order of 1,000 mitochondria, and each mitochondrion can have 1,000, as many as 1,000 of these ATP synthase machines in them. This is another picture of the ATP synthase machine. In this case, the different colors represent the different proteins that are put together to form the machine. And the bottom part, they actually show the atoms, how the atoms exist for each type of protein. Now, altogether, there are about 40,000 atoms in this machine. And this figure shows one of these machines in operation. And with the ADP and the phosphate molecules coming in, and these purple ATP molecules coming out. Again, this is a critical component in every form of life on Earth, from bacteria, plants, animals, and people. So this is what life is like at the molecular level in every form of life on Earth. It's literally filled with machines, many of them that move and even have rotating parts like this machine. So does evolution theory have any science-based explanation of how such a machine like ATP synthase arose? The answer is none whatsoever. They have no explanation how such a machine could have come about. And just to give you some idea, this is I've got some quotes from Michael Behe's book Darwin's Black Box, published in 1996, 24 years ago, as to the state, as to what these discoveries in molecular biology have done to as far as the theory of evolution is concerned. I'll just read them quickly. Modern science has learned that ultimately life is a molecular phenomenon. All organisms are made of molecules that act as the nuts and bolts, gears and pulleys of biological systems. Since the mid-1950s, biochemistry has painstakingly elucidated the workings of life at the molecular level. Darwin was ignorant of the reason for variation within a species, one of the requirements of his theory, but biochemistry has identified the molecular basis for it. 19th century science couldn't even guess at the mechanism for vision, immunity, or movement, but modern biochemistry has identified the molecules that allow these and other functions. It was once expected that the basis of life would be exceedingly simple. That expectation has been smashed. Vision, motion, and other biological functions have proven to be no less sophisticated than television cameras and automobiles. The elegance and complexity of biological systems at the molecular level have paralyzed science's attempt to explain their origins. There has been virtually no attempt to account for the origin of specific complex biological systems, much less any progress. More importantly, there are compelling reasons based on the structure of the systems themselves to think that a Darwinian explanation for the mechanisms of life will forever prove elusive. In other words, there would never be a Darwinian explanation for these aspects of living systems. He goes on to say, if you search the scientific literature on evolution, and if you focus your search on the question of how molecular machines, the basis of life, developed, you will find an eerie and complete silence. So when advocates of evolution give the impression that evolution theory accounts for the molecular aspects of living organisms, they are engaging in fraud. That's pretty strong, but I believe it's accurate. Behe's book was published 24 years ago, and what has happened is even more documentation of the incredible features that we find in cells at this molecular level, with no explanation, no naturalistic explanation forthcoming. So another aspect of this complexity is that all the cell's thousands of different kinds of machines, such as ATP synthase, are themselves fabricated within the cell. How is that achieved? Well, the detailed specifications for each protein are encoded within the organism's DNA. And copies of these specifications are made in what are called messenger RNA, and there are little machines that turn that coding into the proteins. The proteins that unite to form cellular machines are themselves manufactured by these special cellular machines known as ribosomes, utilizing the DNA specifications. So here we see a string of messenger RNA shown in green that's moving through the ribosome, and it allows transfer RNA bound to amino acids, each one bound to a single amino acid. Each one of these transfer RNAs is unique to the amino acid that it's bound to, and so the tape that's passing through the ribosome is able to put together this chain of amino acids that becomes the protein in just the exact sequence that's given in the messenger RNA. So the eerie and complete silence in the scientific literature on evolution, which Michael Behe wrote, likewise applies to the origin of the ribosome machinery. Evolutionists have no scientific explanation whatever for how this machinery came into being. And without that machinery, there is no life, not even a single cell. Every cell, every organism, bacteria, the simplest cells rely on all this machinery. So evolutionists have no explanation at all for how such complexity could arise. None. But the challenges for evolution theory posed by the structure of life at the molecular level does not end there. Let's look at a little more in detail at the proteins themselves and how they what they must go through to form the molecular machine. They come out of the ribosome as a linear chain of amino acids. But these amino acids, each one has a charge associated with it on its side branches, and those charges are such that these proteins tend to form helices. What's the secondary structure? It's called the alpha helix, and though that allows this chain to fold up into a three-dimensional structure, and so you get when that happens, you form what's called a tertiary structure, an individual folded peptide, and then in most machines are built of multiple folded peptides. That's the quaternary structure shown here. And this, what's shown is actually a hemoglobin molecule consisting of 4 of these peptide chains that are folded together. And so that's what's involved for these linear chains to become a useful machine in the cell. Again, this is a little more detail on the hemoglobin molecule. It consists of 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains. Each one of these folded chains has what's called a heme group at the center of the chain containing an iron atom, which allows the hemoglobin to transport oxygen, to latch on to oxygen molecules and transport them throughout the cell in the blood. Okay, so what begins as 4 linear chains of amino acids folds into the 3D hemoglobin structure. The final structure depends critically on the 3D distribution of charge on the surfaces of the amino acid links forming the chains. Not just any amino acid sequence will do. In fact, the sequences that actually work are exceedingly rare. So how does evolution theory explain how a new protein with a new functionality arises? Well, the standard answer is that random mutation of existing genetic instructions are required to generate the new DNA specifications. But crucial to whether the mutated protein functions or not is whether it can fold correctly. So again, this is a summary of what I just mentioned, that there are successive steps of protein folding going from the primary linear chain shown at the very top of the slide, A, as it's manufactured by the ribosome, then folding first in a helical, it either forms a alpha helix or a beta sheet. The helix in figure B, the sheet in C, and then the tertiary structure, these alpha helices and beta sheets collapse to form what's called a protein fold. So essentially every functional biological machine contains at least one protein fold in it. So the proteins that fold are extremely unlikely. Doug Axe, in experimental work published in 2004 involving site-directed mutations in 150 amino acid protein folding domain from a common enzyme, found that the ratio of stable folds with function to the whole set of possible amino acid sequences of that length was only 1 out of 10 to the 77th power. So he did very, very precise, exacting experimental work to determine just how many mutated versions of the protein actually could fold. And he documented this number. It was published in the Journal of Molecular Biology in 2004. So just to summarize that again, he was addressing the issue of how many functional folds exist among all the possible combinations of amino acids with that length, 150 sites. So if there are 150 sites, 20 possible amino acids at each site, that the number of possible amino acid combinations is 20 to the 150th power, or 1 times 10 to the 195th power. But the ratio that he found was the fraction of folds of amino acids that actually could fold into a functioning structure divided by the total number of possible combinations was only 1 divided by 10 to the 77th power. So how likely is it that a random event with such a low probability would ever occur in the history of the Earth, or for that matter, even the universe? Well, we're going to focus on the Earth. The answer very much depends on the number of trials available. Just like the odds of winning in the lottery is very closely related to how many lottery tickets you can buy. In this kind of game, evolution game, whether or not it is possible, succeeds or not, depends on how many trials are available to test these possible configurations. And let me emphasize here, the number of possible trials in this trial and error process that evolution postulates can be no more than the total number of organisms that have ever existed over the history of the Earth. We'll see shortly why that's the case. So let's establish an upper limit on the total number of individual organisms that plausibly could have lived on Earth over its entire history. Back, so already 20 years ago, a team estimated the reproduction rate of all the single-celled organisms on Earth today, including bacteria and archaea, which at one point they were all lumped together as bacteria. the number they came up with was 1.7 times 10 to the 30th organisms per year. And most of these live in the ocean. Some of them actually live on land, in soil, and even at fairly great depths in the solid earth. But the estimate, a pretty robust number, is 10 to the 30th organisms per year. And by the way, the mass of these organisms is estimated to be about 60 to 100% of the mass of the plants on Earth. So there's a significant amount of biomass in these bacteria that live mostly in the ocean. So let's multiply the reproduction rate of these organisms by 10 to account for all other forms of life and for conditions more favorable for life in the past relative to today. Let us assume at least one mutation per individual, such that all organisms are genetically different. Now, that's a very generous assumption, but let's make that assumption that there's at least one unique mutation in each organism that makes all the organisms different from all the others. And also let us assume a time span. Let us assume the evolutionary estimate for the age of the Earth of 4.6 times 10 to the 9th years. Under these assumptions, we obtain an upper limit on the number of genetically distinct organisms that could have ever existed on Earth. So multiplying those numbers together, we get a number on the order of 10 to the 41st organisms. So that's an upper bound on how many different genetically different organisms that have ever existed on the Earth. And I point out that Behe, in a more recent book, The Edge of Evolution, published in 2007, uses 10 to the 40th for this estimate. My guess is that he didn't multiply it by 10 as I did, to be a little more generous. So note that this number 10 to the 41st corresponds to 1 followed by 41 zeros. Now, this limit on the number of genetically distinct organisms that could have ever existed on Earth is also a generous upper limit on the total number of trials available to evolution for all the new proteins and all the diverse types of life on Earth. So this is all the lottery tickets. This is all the trials. This is all the rolls of the dice that evolution has to work with. And we'll see that it comes up short even for a single protein, a single short protein. That's because the probability of finding one functional protein fold in an amino acid sequence only 150 units long is only 1 in 10 to the 77th, as Doug Axe found. With at most 10 to the 41st tries available, the odds of succeeding are only 1 in 10 to the 36th power. That is one chance in a trillion. Note that this fold is just one fold in one protein out of the roughly 100,000 different kinds of proteins we have in our body. One has at most only 10 to the 41st tries for all of them combined, if you can imagine that. Okay. That number of trials available is so pitifully small relative to the number of molecular configurations that are possible. A trial and error process is guaranteed to fail even for a single live protein. There simply are not enough trials, not enough rolls of the dice for a trial and error search strategy possibly to succeed. And you can do this kind of calculation, and I've done it for 30 years using much simpler ways of estimating the probabilities. But And some of those are simple enough for a high school student to do. And this is relatively straightforward enough so that it's utterly inexcusable for anyone, and certainly a scientist, to claim that a trial and error process can discover the blueprint for even one biomolecule, much less the 100,000 we have in our bodies. Such a claim, I assert, represents blatant science fraud. And the logic here is airtight. It's so simple to come to this conclusion. And this idea of mutation and selection, being able to discover new proteins, new functional proteins, is just so absurd when you run the numbers. It's just amazing that scientists, well-educated scientists, have not run the numbers and are blithely ignorant of this hard reality. All right, so I've spent a moderate amount of time here on that line of argument, but there are many other reasons with similar force as to why evolutionary theory fails to satisfy basic standards for being valid science. So I'm going to quickly run through 8 more of these kinds of reasons. The first of these 8 is that evolutionary theory has absolutely no scientific explanation for the origin of life specifications encoded in the DNA of each organism. A major reason is that these specifications are ultimately linguistic and hence non-material. I have a whole lecture on that topic. I can't go into it now, but the details can be found in this paper that Jeremy Lyon and I published back in 2015 in the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society, an article entitled A Linguistic Argument for God's Existence. It's posted on the Answers in Genesis website and also on my website, globalflood.org. But this article shows that language is a non-material phenomenon. That in itself falsifies naturalism, falsifies materialist philosophy, because there's non-material reality that we're immersed in all the time. The language that we use, even when in our thoughts, this is a non-material phenomenon. The DNA is the specifications are linguistic. There's no debate about that, and therefore non-material. So there's no material theory that can possibly explain the specifications in DNA. And in that paper, I show this is a compelling argument for God's reality. You have to have a super mind for these kinds of specifications to exist, to come about. Okay, number 2, natural selection cannot even detect, much less eliminate, most bad mutations, and hence cannot prevent genetic decline. This is known as genetic entropy. At the present mutation rate, the human race is undergoing a disturbing rate of genetic decline, it turns out. One of the greatest geneticists of the 20th century, James Crow, published this graph not long before he passed away. He published it in 1997. His estimate was that there's between a 1% and 2% decrease in human fitness with each generation currently, and you plot that as done here, and you find that the number of generations that could have existed in human history, if the mutation rate has been roughly what it is now, is only a few hundred generations. That you get close to extinction after 250 or 300 generations. And if we look at the genealogies in the Bible, we're not far from being at the 200 generation point today. This is well documented in this book, first published in 2005, entitled Genetic Entropy by John Sanford. The current edition is the 4th edition, published in 2014. So it's a powerful refutation of evolution theory. Evolution simply cannot deal with this, the fact that natural selection cannot even see the vast majority of mutations, either favorable or unfavorable, and the unfavorable ones just accumulate unchecked, and driving each organism toward extinction. Moreover, number 3, favorable mutations are so rare as to be non-existent relative to deleterious mutations. The ratio of deleterious mutations to beneficial ones is estimated to be on the order of 1,000,000 to 1. So that's also fatal for evolution theory. Darwin had no idea that that was the case. But even if favorable mutations do occur, the waiting time for even short strings of them to arise and be fixed in a population is prohibitively long, tens of millions to billions of years in higher organisms. And this is a result we published. John Sanford was the first author. We published in 2018 an article entitled The Waiting Time Problem in a Model Hominin Population. Hominin is a human-like organism. And this was published in Theoretical Biology and Medical Modeling. And it's been downloaded thousands of times since then. So it is getting some traction, apparently. This is a graph from that paper. It shows how waiting time increases as the string of the length of the string increases of mutations that have to happen simultaneously or have to happen together. And just 2, if you just need 2, if you use the very generous, extremely generous assumption that the combination would give a 10% benefit in fitness, it takes 84 million years for that string to be fixed in the population. And as you increase the length of the string, the time explodes. In a similar way, if you go to a more realistic value for the fitness benefit, we saw for 10% it was 84 million years for a string length of 2. If you go to a 1% benefit, it increases to 273 million years. 0.1% benefit, which is more typical, you're close to 1 billion years. So this means that this evolution procedure, even if you have beneficial mutations, is dead in the water. It simply does not work. Another point is the prevalence of orphan genes. It shows that Darwin's conjecture of common ancestry is now impossible to defend. And the reason is that some 5 to 10% of the genes in each type of organism have been found to be unique to that organism. That is, they occur in no other kind of organism. And here's some papers that were, as this has been discovered over the last 20 years. This is a quote from this paper mentioned here. Comparative genome analyses indicate that every taxonomic group so far studied contains 10 to 20% of genes that lack recognizable homologs or similar counterparts in other species. What this is saying is that each kind of organism, and in some cases it's down to the species level, is unique, appears to be a unique creation with unique genes that are found in no other organism. This is from another paper. A total of 7,184 genes, or 45%, were unique to this ant species relative to the 3 other species that were studied. This paper is a draft genome of the globally widespread and invasive Argentine ant, and so published in the national proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So this isn't. This is in some cases the fraction of unique genes is large. Another paper pointing to the same phenomenon. Quote, we found 9,361 proteins that are unique to A. cephalotes, representing over half of its predicted proteome. So here they were studying the proteins instead of the DNA, but they came to the same conclusion. This is a leafcutter ant. This was also published in a respected journal, PLOS Genetics. Okay, so that means that this idea of common ancestry is defunct now. Some older arguments. This is one, the staggering number of transitional forms required by Darwin's gradualistic hypothesis are systematically missing from the fossil record. And this is a quote by Darwin himself. What geological research has not revealed in Darwin's day is the former existence of infinitely numerous gradations as fine as existing varieties, connecting together nearly all existing and extinct species. So Darwin acknowledged that these fine gradations, these transitional forms, simply did not exist in the fossil record. But his hope was that with more research that they would be found. However, in the 1970s, 80s, it was clear that they simply were not there after another over 120 years of paleontological research. And this is Stephen Jay Gould, his quote, the extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as the trade secret of paleontology. Another quote, the absence of fossil evidence for intermediary stages between major transitions in organic design. Indeed, our inability, even in our imagination, to construct functional intermediates in many cases has been a persistent and nagging problem for gradualistic accounts of evolution. So he and his colleagues came up with an idea called punctuated equilibrium, where major change occurred quickly, so quickly that it was not recorded in the fossils, but as far as the mechanism, he had no mechanism for doing that. 7, Darwin's idea of increasing diversity of life with time is falsified by the sudden appearance of most animal phyla at the beginning of the record. These two plots contrast contrast Darwin's expectation with what's actually in the record. History of life diversity according to Darwinian expectations at the top and according to the actual rock record at the bottom. The actual record is characterized by striking discontinuity, with most major types being present at the very beginning. This is another way of presenting the data at this, what's called the Great Unconformity in the geological record. That's the time of the so-called Cambrian explosion. In the Cambrian rocks, 23 out of the 27 total animal phyla in the entire fossil record appear by the top of the Cambrian portion of the rock record. There's only 4 other phyla you see in the next to the bottom row section in that chart. It lists the, see if I can read that, the nematodes and the platyhelminthes, the flatworms, and rotifera, and the Nemertea, which I'm not sure what that is. Those are the only 4 phyla found in the fossil record that are not present in the Cambrian. So even vertebrata are present in the, chordata are present in the Cambrian rocks. Very much in contrary to Darwinian evolution. Finally, and this was covered by Russ Humphreys in the last talk, multiple lines of evidence indicate that the Earth is young, thousands, not billions of years old, so that the vast span of time evolution theory requires simply does not exist. And to me, one of the most astonishing types of documentation are the multiple examples of soft tissue preservation, spectacular soft tissue preservation. This article published in 2005 in Science by Mary Schweitzer, where she documented flexible blood vessels containing red blood cells in a T-Rex thigh bone. She showed in the video these blood vessels were still flexible. She could stretch them like elastic with a set of tweezers, and inside are these blood vessels, still red blood vessels inside the cell. To imagine that kind of preservation could span 65 million years is just irrational. So, in conclusion, evolution theory is readily falsified in light of the discoveries made in molecular biology over the past 7 decades. Although its advocates claim that it is a scientific hypothesis or even a fact, in reality, it is nothing but blatant science fraud. It's nothing but atheist propaganda. Now, the Bible actually predicts this. In Romans 1, describes this kind of thing. It says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made, so they are without excuse." I would say today in the 21st century, with what we know from molecular biology, that's true as it's never been so clear of God's reality, and just by looking at what has been made. Paul continues there. Next verse, "For even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks, but became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools." A little later he says, "For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper." So God, this passage says that God pronounces judgment. His judgment comes upon people who continue to engage in this kind of behavior. And he gives them over to a depraved mind. And I believe we're seeing that situation being manifested dramatically in our culture at this very moment. People with a depraved mind are on the loose and aggressively seeking to exercise power and influence in our society. I believe it's high time we challenge evolution in a serious way. We not permit it to be taught in our public schools. We go on a campaign with the school boards pointing out that it's science fraud. It's not science. And so I believe it's time. It's high time Christians rose up and let the light, their light shine in the culture and make a difference. And I believe it's only merciful, knowing what the consequences are, to be doing this, to be taking this kind of action. So hopefully this talk is an encouragement in that direction. If anyone has any question that evolution is not just utterly bankrupt, hopefully this message helped you understand, put some of the pieces together, that there's simply no way with today's knowledge that this Darwinian theory, which really hasn't been changed since the 1940s, can be defended. So it should be replaced. So thank you for your attention, and I will look forward to any questions you have. So that's the end of my talk. So I guess we can fairly soon start the Q&A.
Yeah, if we want to, again, if this was a live event, I would probably say, hey, take a bathroom break. My wife and everybody's outside, free refreshments, coffee, but I'm assuming you've been taking care of that on your own. Just to kind of build off of what Dr. Baumgartner and Dr. Humphreys has said, one thing, and I've been sorting all the questions that have been coming in. Again, thank you, everyone. And again, please text or email me a mailing address if you want to keep the conversation going. And again, I've got a lot of this material that I would be more than happy to send to you, 100% free. But even, let's say from our, counterparts at the Intelligent Design, which is the Discovery Institute, even things they publish, like let's say this Explore Evolution, like Dr. Baumgartner was saying, you see all they're saying in this instance is don't teach creationism, don't teach even intelligent design, just teach the weaknesses of neo-Darwinism. And you see, your typical model, okay, here's what, your fossil record, which, there's a lot of problems with that, but this is what you're shown in the typical textbook. Well, this is actually what it looks like in reality. So again, you're seeing, there we go, a lot of different, you make it look like it's this very fluid a set of fossils going from one to another, but that's absolutely not the case. You can see here the different sizes, the different the groupings. Same thing with homology. And again, what's interesting here, and this is they're just simply saying the mole versus the mole cricket. Well, even the most adamant Darwinist will say, well, yeah, these two aren't related at all. Well, there does seem to be a very adamant common design here. Well, okay, would that be a common designer? Oh, of course not. Okay, well, now what's funny here is this is just simply presented as a supplement to show, to encourage critical thinking and to show, like Dr. Baumgartner was saying, the weaknesses of a Darwinian hypothesis. But this, even at the state and national level, is banned. So what's ironic here is you can't even present the weaknesses. And with that being said, I actually had someone email me today on, well, why isn't this out more? Well, again, this is just Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, who is with Answers in Genesis, Replacing Darwin. Again, a PhD from Harvard in cell biology. And again, his answer, they always use these interesting terms as far as saying, well, is it that everyone is, it's a conspiracy, or that they're all that dumb? And again, that's a straw man. It's neither of those. It's simply ignorance. And what I mean by that is I'm not, an absolute, well, I probably am a genius, but maybe not quite. No, I'm kidding. But I've lost count of how many atheist groups, how many PhDs, especially junior colleges and high schools that I've met with different professors or teachers and said, well, okay, you teach biology. Okay, well, I welcome you to blow me out of the water. Here are some of the questions I have for you. And it's really not, it's not conspiracy theory. It's not, just being dumb. It's ignorance. They've not seen the competing models. And again, to use the words of Stephen Meyer with the Discovery Institute, Gunter Beckley was a German paleontologist, one of the most critically acclaimed in Germany. And he was asked to put together for Darwin's birthday a display showing. He basically described it as, it was like a model to where you had all the creationist and intelligent design books on one side, and then Darwin's Origin of Species on the other, and it's showing where the Origin of Species, even though it was just one book, outweighed all of them. And someone suggested to him, in error, well, you should probably read some of those books so you can show why there's so much in error. So he, unfortunately, in his words, took him up on it. And he said that he read some of the creationist and intelligent design critiques of Darwinism, just like Dr. Baumgartner has presented to us tonight. And he said, I was at a loss. I couldn't refute anything they said. This wasn't pseudoscience. This was good, logical, mainstream science, and I could not refute it. So he said, I can no longer be a Darwinist. In a similar vein as you'll see some agnostics like David Berlinski or Michael Denton, these people that says, look, I'm not sure, the only thing I am sure of is that neo-Darwinism is definitely false. And of course, Gunter Beckley was immediately dismissed, fired. Again, if you want to, just get a little bit of an idea, you can go to YouTube and just type in expelled, no intelligence allowed, and you'll see list upon list of professors from all walks of life that have been fired simply for questioning Darwinism. And again, no reasons behind it, but just fired, censorship. So again, I think this adds fuel to the fire. And again, I could go on and on, but even 2016 at the King's College in London, you had the great minds of Darwinism meeting. Why did they meet? Well, they met because natural selection and mutation simply was impotent to get what you need from Darwinian theory. Well, they only had left either, well, intelligent design or some type of creationism, or stick to teaching a known false theory. And of course, well, they can't teach intelligent design or creationism, so they decided to continue to teach the falsities of neo-Darwinism. So again, I have lost count of how many times I have just had simple conversations with instructors of Darwinism and just asking a few questions. And usually I'll say, how about you ask me 3 questions and I ask you 1. And usually they'll say, oh, well, that's easy. That's a slam dunk. But normally by the end of the conversation, they have completely said, well, you know what? I had never thought about that. Well, that's my point. And I think Dr. Humphreys and Dr. Baumgartner have done an excellent job this evening in pushing you to think about it. What does this mean? And again, if myself, if Stephen, if John or Russ are wrong, then why not blow us out of the water with this other evidence? I mean, it's not like we're if we really are pseudoscience, then please show us. But again, like I said, and again, email me or text because we've got a ton of these that we're hoping to give away in person tonight. But whether it be, atheism on trial, these arguments are all outdated. They're the same. Whether it be the Bible in history. Again, my background, the humble museum we have that we're going to walk everyone through this weekend, had it been in live, it stands on this. And similarly, whether it be Dr. Humphreys, Starlight in Time. Again, we had a bunch of copies of Lee Strobel, Case for Christ, Distant Starlight, and you could be like, oh, you're trying to make money. Well, considering I'm giving these away for free, no, I'm not trying to make any money. And this is an excellent video with Dr. Humphreys and Dr. Harnett, showing, first of all, where they agree, but also where they disagree, which I think is healthy. Again, Dr. Sanford wasn't able to make it tonight, but again, Dr. Baumgartner touched on this, and this is the mystery of our declining genes. Again, this does support the biblical narrative found in Genesis. And again, you'll find out much more tomorrow night, and that is on CPT, or Planetary Cataclysm, by, again, Dr. Baumgartner. So whether it is these or all these different groups, I mean, biological information, by Dr. Sanford. Again, this has Michael Behe. This has a ton of other PhDs, and similarly with contested bones. And again, I mean, I was there in person at the book release. Whoop, there we go, of Undeniable, Doug Axe. And I've had conversations with him, and he has substantiated exactly what Dr. Baumgartner just presented to us, and that is the common science, or the common sense, that's completely against neo-Darwinism. And again, if I'm wrong, please blow me out of the water. I've been asking that for now almost 20 years. So with that, again, I can't thank Dr. Humphreys and Baumgartner enough. And I can't encourage you enough to say definitely tune in tomorrow, where we're going to be bridging the gap, so to speak. Think of tonight as more of a presentation. Like I said, I invited a bunch of atheists, free thinkers, even though they're usually the most closed thinkers that you can think of. Old Earth creationists, young Earth creationists, all the above to this evening's event. And then tomorrow will be much more looking at Dr. Humphreys' cosmology, his latest and hopefully greatest, and Dr. Baumgartner's, literally, I mean, it's been almost adopted by practically, I wouldn't say all, but the majority of creationist groups, looking at continental sprint versus continental drift. And again, like I said, I mean, I broke out I was going to say the blackboard, but the dry erase board. If somebody really wants to go to town, let's work through the equations. I've got them written down here. So blow us out of the water if you want. But without further ado, I would love to start jumping into some of these questions. We've ironically, I need to check my phone again, but they're pretty much neck and neck, Dr. Humphreys to Baumgartner. So Stephen, if you don't have any objections, I'm going to go ahead and just start going down the list. And what I'm probably going to do is I'll do one for Humphreys, one for Baumgartner, and there was a couple that were looks like it said either or. So I'm just going to go ahead and start going through the questions if there's no objection, and then we'll go from there. And then once we're done with them, I don't know if there's any kind of time limit. I know the university was going to kick us out at 9:30, but hey, it's online, so I guess we can go all night if we got enough caffeine in us. So if no objections, I'm going to start going through these. Question one to Dr. Humphreys from someone named James, not me. What do you think about Dr. Lyell's anisotropic synchrony convention? Is it viable, and what does that mean compared to your own time dilation model?
Okay, thanks for that question. I don't know how to really, well, let's say that I object mainly to the biblical requirements of Dr. Lyell's theory. It requires God, when he did that, that Exodus 20:11 verse, for in 6 days Jehovah made the heavens and the earth. It requires God to have a peculiar, strange definition of simultaneity. In other words, what's now? It's not a natural or a normal definition. He thinks it is normal, but it's not the way most people think of what now is. If you consider a distant galaxy, what does it look like right now? Well, what's now? If the galaxy were discovered to emit tachyons that moved much faster than the speed of light, and we could have a telescope built that looked at tachyon light, then we would see the galaxies as they are now. But what Dr. Lyle requires is that we call now to be something strange. In other words, we define the first day of creation everywhere in the universe is defined by the line of light that reaches the earth. When it reaches the earth at the first day, then if you go backward all along that line back into time, we call that now instead of we call that yesterday. So, and it requires that God be using that peculiar definition of simultaneity. So that's my primary objection. There are some scientific objections I have to it too, but that's, if you don't mind God using a strange definition, then it's okay. So hope that helped.
For Dr. Bumgarner, Doug from Arkansas asks, it seems Darwinism has not aged well, as groups like Intelligent Design have really picked holes to the point that in 2016, the great minds of Darwin met at King's College in England and acknowledged that natural selection and mutation simply are insufficient to do the job required by neo-Darwinism, but they wouldn't even consider intelligent design or creation, so they left the meeting basically deciding to keep teaching the lies and pseudoscience. With that being the case, how much longer do you think Darwinists will continue to diverge into pseudoscience?
Well, this is I think most viewers are aware we're dealing with worldview conflict, and we're basically dealing with we're in a spiritual, this is a spiritual issue. And so if a person is, has not, become aware of the kindness of God. Romans 2 talks about the kindness of God leading us to repentance. If a person has not understood the gospel, that God is offering pardon, just freely, complete pardon for their sins. If they haven't grasped that, then every human being is aware that they're guilty of transgressing against God, and so they're they're insecure, and so there's a built-in resistance to acknowledging that even that God is real. So this exerts a powerful influence on the way people think. Many people are not even aware of what's going on and why they think the way they do. but we're basically dealing with a spiritual, what's going on spiritually with people. And so, there are people, I'm generally believe this, that our primary mission as Christians is to be communicating the gospel message to people, so that otherwise they can't really, they're more or less locked into, they're imprisoned by these deceptions, and they can't escape. So I believe that the way people truly are transformed is by hearing the gospel message, the good news of what God has done in Jesus, and when they embrace that, well, as Paul described it, scales fell from his eyes. He, all of a sudden could see again. He could see for the first time, and spiritually. And so I believe that's that's the primary thing that needs to happen. There are a few people, we read their testimonies. You shared, this. They're people who are exposed to these arguments that we've been making, and it's true that many have never been exposed to them before, and when they are, they realize they're correct, and they make correction. You mentioned Anthony Flew. Toward the end of his life, he had been one of the most well-known atheists in the 20th century, and he reversed his view. But it was basically he was exposed to some of these arguments that we're talking about. Plus, he interacted with I forget the name of the theologian. He had some good Christian input as well. Anyway, so I believe people when they're shown the big difficulties with Darwinism, they don't. For a lot of them, they don't. They just can't. They just can't embrace that life is a creation of God. That's a place they just can't go mentally. So, but nevertheless, I believe we're called to be proclaiming the truth, letting these arguments be widely known, and basically leaving the results to God, but realizing that we're dealing. This is ultimately a spiritual issue, that people are blind spiritually, are bound spiritually in darkness. So I guess that would be my answer.
Nope, I think that's good. And to your point, just to add on to that, and I don't mean that in any way as mudslinging, but yeah, I mean, when I first, when did I graduate high school? It's been so long. 1996. I mean, there were not necessarily Victor Stinger, but yeah, if you look at the 20th century, when you're seeing Anthony Flew, Bertrand Russell, I think Bertrand Russell died in 1970-ish. It had a little bit more intellectual vigor, but today, and again, I don't mean that pejoratively, but I mean the atheistic arguments, I don't know if I've ever seen them more weak, and I don't know if I've ever seen the Christian arguments so strong, to the point of where literally, I mean, most of the atheists that I know of have abandoned naturalism. Some of them, like, it's funny, I was able to have a little conversation with Lawrence Krauss, very short one with Sean Carroll, who I was trying to really bait into a discussion. But, all of them have abandoned true naturalism in the reductionistic standpoint. And like Sean Carroll now calls it poetic naturalism. Well, it's non-reductionistic, so it's not really naturalism because it doesn't go back to nature. And again, I think that's going to be interesting just for a plug tomorrow, that literally, you know, I mean, how old am I? 42? I don't think I've ever seen the case for Christian theism as strong as it is today. And I think that, you know, to your point, Dr. Baumgartner and Dr. Humphreys, this point is just echoed that much more. And again, I can say from my humble little, you know, dives into the, you know, discussions with atheistic groups, you know, my meager little writings, it's most atheists today are all bark no bite, whereas Christian theism has really, you know, again, if it's based on true truth, in the words of Francis Schaeffer, it makes sense why it is so commonsensical today. And you know, but anyway, with that, I'll go back to Dr. Humphreys. We have Jim from Oklahoma, who asks, I see no real reason to abandon your original cosmological model in Starlight in Time 1994. I have worked it out mathematically, and whether we're talking about black hole, white hole, or merely something that just acts like one of these postulants with an event horizon, the math is sound, so I'm curious why you felt it necessary to modify your original theory, as I find your original theory stronger than your second. But on a side note, I'm very excited to hear about your third revised cosmology tomorrow.
Okay. I know a number of people who like my first cosmology best, and how can I argue with that? You know, they like my cosmology. So the main problem with my first was that it didn't give enough time dilation soon enough as you got out into the universe. I would have preferred a curve of time dilation, or more history. Let's plot the amount of universe history versus distance from us. I would have preferred a plot that went on a straight line, that the further you got out from us, the more the history increased. But instead, what my first cosmology gave was a flat curve, and then it curved up way out there at billions of light years. But so that was something that John Hartnett pointed out some time ago, and he was right. But there's a lot of good features to my cosmology. Each cosmology I haven't completely abandoned. When I went to the next, I kept features of the first cosmology in my second, and in my third too. There will probably be features of my first and second that I incorporate into my third when I get to doing the scientific work. But my main problem with my first two cosmologies is they aren't biblical enough. They don't pay enough attention to what God said he did in Genesis chapter 1. So that's why I'm working on the third. But I have a feeling that the more cosmologies we have, the better off we are. The more likely one of them is to be right. So the peculiar situation right now is that every creationist who's published in cosmology has a different theory, and they like their theory better than they like anyone else's theory. So you've got all these, more than a half a dozen people with their own favorite theories, and they don't all disagree. They don't all agree very much. So it's just funny. I think it's humorous. So
now, and with that, I think it's a good time to do the shameless plug, as I have about 15 of them left. Whoop! Of Distant Starlight, a forum. One of the things I really like about this DVD is that Dr. Humphreys and Dr. Harnett, well, I mean, they agree with a lot of points, but they also disagree. So again, I think this is a healthy dialogue, just to say, hey, look, we don't know for sure. We're not, saying this has got to be it. The one thing that disturbs me with someone, again, just to say that, like Hugh Ross, is I've talked to Hugh Ross several times, and I've told him, I said, well, I really think concordanism. Well, I think that's not only a bad hermeneutic, but I think you're setting yourself up for a fall, because he is adamant that no, the Bible teaches the Big Bang. And well, as soon as the Big Bang, let's say, is proven false, well, either Dr. Ross has got to say, well, the Bible is inerrant, like someone like William Lane Craig, which we'll get into that later, would state, or he has to then say, well, sorry, I was wrong. What I meant was the Bible teaches this new theory, whatever this new theory is. So I do find the humility of Dr. Humphreys, Dr. Harnett, Dr. Baumgartner to be very commendable. That even though we may apprehend creation, we don't comprehend it fully. And again, don't get me started off. I could go off on a tangent on my work with William Lane Craig, and again, that kind of ties into this next question a little bit with Dr. Baumgartner, and that is, and I've experienced this firsthand with William Lane Craig, who I worked with once upon a time, helping him start some of his original philosophical chapters. My wife Gina and I had the privilege of retracing the footsteps of Paul with him and a few other groups to Greece, Turkey, Italy. It was a really great trip, but I kind of cornered him on some of his and that's why I've always I've leaned a little bit more on the obviously the recent creation, because first of all, the social sciences is on its side, the biblical hermeneutics is on its side, and the natural sciences, even if someone was let's say they were split down the middle, well, still that means 75% is on the recent creationism side. But moreover, the problem that I posited at William Lane Craig, and this is the question posited to you, Dr. Baumgartner, is what happens when William Lane Craig, and it's funny, him and I had this discussion, and they published it in their question of the week, and it went to a book form. Well, one of the questions, and that was when I asked him, I said, well, okay, Francis Schaeffer, who had said originally, fine, even if you don't posit a recent, let's say, less than 10,000 year creation, you cannot jettison a historical Adam and Eve. You cannot jettison a historical fall, a historical flood, a historical Tower of Babel. Well, from my understanding, and that was me being face to face with Dr. Craig, he's basically abandoned all of them. And when I pushed him, I said, well, why do you even still hold to a virgin birth? And he said, well, you just, and again, I'm quoting directly here. He said, well, in this instance, you jettison modern biology because the text is that clear that a virgin birth happened. And then this question is alluding to what do we sacrifice from a biblical understanding if we go on the side of if I'm reading this right, if we go on the side of a ancient old earth creationism.
Okay, well, that's my conviction is you abandon the inspiration of Scripture. You abandon the Bible being the Word of God. You abandon Jesus being who he claimed to be. Jesus is no longer the self-existent Son of God, no longer the Savior. So you basically jettison Christianity. So that's I would say that if a person is honest, that's what's at stake.
Mm-hmm. Nope, I agree, 100%. And then just to keep going, Dr. Humphreys, is dark matter and dark energy real, or are they complete conjecture? Where do you and Dr. Harnett differ on this topic?
Well, actually, Dr. Hartnett and I agree on this topic. We think that dark matter well, maybe I'm beginning to disagree with him on this. I haven't talked with him lately. Let me put it this way. I didn't think that there was a good case for dark matter at all, but I've come around to thinking that maybe there is invisible, undetectable energy in the fabric of the universe. And I think I know how this happened. So I'm working on a theory right now where it wouldn't be dark matter. It would be something, it would be an energy, polarization energy, I would call it, in the fabric of the universe. And since the fabric of space is not detectable to us as the particles that it is, then I think that this energy of polarization in the fabric would also be undetectable. In other words, I don't think there's matter. I don't think there's dark matter, but I do think that there is some kind of undetectable energy locked up in the fabric of space that does the same thing, and it's produced by the gravitational force. So let me put it this way. I'm going. These are things that I haven't published and haven't got checked to. I don't have a sanity check from an editor and reviewer. But you know how in electricity and magnetism, if you apply an electric field to a dielectric, you polarize the particles in it. The positive particles move one way, and the negative particles move another way. And there's an energy of polarization to that. I'm beginning to think that a gravitational field does that to the fabric of space, pulls apart matter and antimatter particles within the fabric and making an energy, and that energy gravitates. That energy has mass, E equals mc squared, but it's not detectable to us as particles. So I didn't intend to talk about that subject at all.
No,
I'm still working on this, and I don't know where I'm going to wind up with it. But so far, I've progressed quite a bit mathematically with the idea.
excellent. Well, in some of these questions, I'll go ahead and let the audience know, because there's a ton of them. I'll probably, some of these that are really specific on Humphrey's third cosmology or catastrophic plate tectonics for Dr. Baumgartner, I'm probably going to shift some of those to tomorrow. So we'll go back, though, on ones that are relative to tonight's talk to Dr. Baumgartner, PhD candidate from University of West Indies, Let's see. I see intelligent design and creationism as allies. I think you do as well, but some groups like Answers in Genesis do not. Why do they not join forces? And then secondly, how do you respond to old Earth creationists claiming that fossils aren't evenly distributed throughout the world, but if there were local floods over 4 billion years, it could answer that question. So it looks like there was actually technically 2 questions within that.
Okay. Well, I was trying to integrate them together, and I've already lost the first question. What was
it? The first one was intelligent design and creationism. It looks like he is saying they're allies, but some people like Ken Ham say they're enemies. What's your take?
Okay. You may notice that I did utilize some of the work of the Discovery Institute in my talk tonight. I referenced Doug Axe's work, and and I quoted, or actually had some figures from Stephen Meyer's book, Darwin's Doubt. So basically, I don't have any problem if what these people publish is solid, is sound, and I count them as friends and colleagues. The big difference is their position on the age of the Earth, the reality of the flood, and my view is they just probably haven't dealt with the data enough to realize that the case is solid for a young Earth and for a global flood. But I can work with them on the issues of evolution, on the problems with Darwinism. So I think it's our ranks are too thin for us to be treating each other as enemies.
Exactly. All right, we will try to, let's see, it's almost 9 o'clock. Good news is we've gotten tons of interest, tons of questions. I'm probably gonna do 2 more, and I'll give a asterisk to all those others that have asked questions that we'll circle back on these tomorrow. But if we go back to Dr. Humphreys, let's see here. Has the person didn't give their name, but has Voyager spacecraft passed through the Oort cloud yet? And is the Oort cloud or Kuiper belt real or complete conjecture?
Well, I don't think it's real. It hasn't been detected, and there's no reason to expect it there if you don't think the solar system is old, and we have plenty of evidence that the solar system is young. So I really don't think there has to be an Oort cloud, and I kind of doubt if there is one. Let's see, what was the other part of the question? Oh, has Voyager passed? No, Voyager has not gone that far out. The Oort cloud is they vary on how far out it's supposed to be, but half a light year at least. Voyager is not nearly that far out. So no detection of any Oort cloud out there.
Got it. Then let's see here. Back to Dr. Baumgartner. Jim from Arkansas, Doug Axe, molecular biologist and head of the Discovery Institute Science Center, which you had alluded to, has recently made the comment that he was absolutely dumbfounded to see Christians embracing Darwinism when it's seemingly at its weakest state intellectually in over a century. What are your thoughts on why Christians are still trying to combine two exclusive theories, Darwinism and Christian theism, when Darwinism seems so weak today? Do you see any way to combine Darwinism with Christianity?
Well, let me answer that last one. The answer is no. There's no reason to do it, and no rational basis for trying to mesh them together. Darwinism is an attempt to explain the world without God, explain life without God. So that's the philosophical motivation for Darwinism, and as I was giving in my talk, there's no science to support Darwinism. It simply doesn't work as a method, as a mechanism. So why bother? I mean, it's just it's I would say it's on the trash heap of hypotheses that have come and gone.
No, I agree. And again, a shameless plug. I didn't quite finish all of it, but they sent me a there we go. I don't know if you guys can see that. It is I don't know if you can see that or not. Theistic Evolution, a Scientific, Philosophical, and Theological Critique. Now, this was put forward by the Discovery Institute, which Dr. Bumgarner had talked about earlier, but it is over 1,000 pages by almost 40 different authors, from scientists, theologians, and philosophers, that are saying unequivocally Darwinism and Christianity cannot be put together. So again, this book came out last year, and I was delighted at how well this book was put together from points A to B. And again, they had challenged people like Francis Collins to critique it with his Biologos, the big theistic evolution think tank, and of course they've declined. No big surprise. But again, if anyone wants to see why these two are mutually exclusive, and even in the words of David Berlinski or Michael Denton, who are not Christians, but they're also not Darwinists, they're saying, why would you put a bad theory, being Darwinism, to support your religious belief? So even agnostics are saying, no, this is a bad theory. So no, I agree wholeheartedly. We'll do one more question each, because I know we're a little bit past 9. Dr. Humphreys, Kendra from Oklahoma. Does creation science make better testable predictions than something like naturalism or Darwinism? I have been told that creation science does not make any predictions.
Well, I'm glad she asked, because I happen to have made a half-dozen predictions that have been validated in my work on planetary magnetic fields. I predicted what Voyager and other space probes would find. I made 5 specific predictions, and they've all been verified over the last few decades. And last one, there were several at the planet Mercury that were done by the space probe that orbited Mercury just about 5 or 6 years ago, 2012 or about 2013. There are about 2 predictions, specific ones. And the predictions were in print in the Creation Research Society Quarterly of December 1984, and can be found online on the website there. And then there was another prediction about finding evidence for fast reversals of the Earth's magnetic field in thin lava flows. And those were found by secular scientists a few years later. So I think creation science can make real predictions, and the other side is kind of stuck with a theory that isn't really capable of making predictions. Whenever they try to make a prediction, generally it runs aground on the facts. So, well, in the planetary magnetic fields, the other side, called the dynamo theorists, made some predictions about planet magnetic fields, and those pretty much just went belly up. They were proven wrong in a number of different cases. So I wouldn't like to be on the other side, and I'm having a ball being on this one.
No, I agree.
So,
all right. Well, one thing, we'll do one more question to even it out to Dr. Baumgartner. And I know we're past 9 o'clock. What we'll do, though, is everyone else that's asked a question, I'm kind of doing them in order. And if it's possible, I'm trying to kind of group them together. But we will definitely get to your answers tomorrow. So that'll give you more incentive to come in tomorrow. And again, keep the questions coming. And again, shoot me an email or an address. Like I said, we've got lots of wonderful material to keep the conversation going. I know Stephen and IAC are looking to, keep it going in future as well. So the last question tonight, and it's a little bit ill. Normally I would have pushed this one to tomorrow, but it might be a good segue, Dr. Baumgartner, into tomorrow's talk, because it is Nancy from South Dakota is going straight into the CPT theory. So again, I'll encourage everyone to definitely tune in tomorrow. We're looking at noon until 4, be a little bit more in depth. Originally, it was going to be a little bit more hands-on, like a workshop. But yeah, I think you definitely want to tune in. It's going to be some great information. And once I finish this question, I'll turn it over to Stephen to close us out. But Nancy from South Dakota asks, Dr. Baumgartner, I am indebted to your work on catastrophic plate tectonics, and just wanted to ask if you feel that it was water that burst out from the great deep or lava. I have had an argument with a friend who says he likes CPT, but he thinks Walt Brown's hydroplate model better addresses the fountains of the great deep being largely water instead of lava. And he feels it addresses the erosion factor better than tsunamis. Could you comment if he interpreted this correctly? And since you are talking about the flood tomorrow, I can wait until tomorrow if that would be better. Thank you. So if you would rather wait until tomorrow, I can pick a different question.
Why don't I just answer? I'll just forego talking about the hydroplate theory and just deal with the fountains of the great deep in terms of catastrophic plate tectonics. Okay, I'll just comment that in my, well, it's difficult to have liquid water at depth in the earth. So this does apply to the hydroplate theory. There are what are called hydrodynamic instability issues that generally a lighter fluid tends to rise if it's enclosed by a denser fluid or denser material. So basically, even the small density differences between melted rock and solid rock are enough for where to a large extent, whenever rock begins to melt, the melt generally finds a way to escape and get to the surface and erupt as lava. So if you have something as with as much density contrast as water and rock, that there's strong forces that are going to cause the water to want to find some path to get to the surface. So the idea that you could maintain a stable layer of water beneath the surface, like in Walt Brown's theory, that's very difficult to justify. Just the flexing of the Earth as a result of the daily tides, the fact that the Earth rotates beneath the moon, and that causes the Earth to flex. That's probably all that you need to get cracks that water could find to get to the surface. So that it's very, very difficult to imagine maintaining a layer of water at depth in the Earth. Some people are misled by these popular articles about there being several oceans worth of water in the mantle. What those articles generally don't say is that the water is actually in the lattice of the minerals as basically as hydrogen ions, hydrogen atoms in the lattice of the rock. It's not liquid water at all. And the only way you can get liquid water is for that rock to be erupted to very close to the surface, where it can combine with oxygen and form water and come out. So I'm just from what I understand as a scientist and a geoscientist, it seems very difficult to maintain pockets of water, significant pockets of water at depth in the Earth. I could be surprised, but almost all the physics understanding I have points me in that direction. So having said that, the fountains of the great deep, I see, it basically refers in Genesis 7. It talks about the fountains of the great deep were broken up. That's one translation. Or the word that's translated, the Hebrew word has the sense of being pulled apart or cleaved apart. And so in today's world, we have features in the Earth which could qualify as fountains of the great deep. We have fountains on the ocean bottom, sometimes referred to as black smokers. And this is a result of relatively shallow hydrocirculation of ocean water. The ocean water goes down for a little bit, a few hundred meters, maybe as much as a kilometer, but generally only a few hundred meters, gets heated by the higher temperatures at depth, and then comes out as basically a fountain. And because there's a tendency to dissolve sulfide minerals, in particular iron sulfide, which is black, these vents or fountains erupting water. It's high temperature, very hot water, and frequently have what looks like black. Well, it has black particles in it, and it looks, that's why they're called black smokers. So that these features exist along the mid-ocean ridge system today. Okay, now it appears that the text seems to refer to fountains of the Great Deep that were there at the beginning of the flood. So that it would suggest something like we have today along on the ocean bottom. So I wouldn't be surprised at that. I in fact, I think that's a likely situation in the original created Earth, that you would have regions on the ocean floor where there was some hot rock near the surface, and you would have had this hydrothermal circulation and would have had the same kind of fountains we have today. All right, so in my model, these fountains represent where the ocean plates broke apart and where catastrophic plate tectonics began. So but once catastrophic plate tectonics kicks in and you have plates pulling apart rapidly, then you're going to get some partial melting of rock at these where the plates are moving apart, pulling apart, and you're going to get molten rock in direct contact with seawater, and that rock is going to be at least 1,500 degrees Celsius at an absolute minimum, and that's enough. There's enough energy there to immediately cause the water in contact with the magma to be converted into supercritical water. And if there's any pressure variation, that supercritical water is going to flash to steam and produce a supersonic jet coming up from the bottom of the ocean. So these are going to be spectacular jets, if you will, fountains. If you're looking at it from space, you're going to have these supersonic jets, the steam traveling at supersonic velocity, having enough buoyancy to reach into the stratosphere. So there's going to be something else that could possibly be described as a fountain, but it would be different from the fountain that existed prior to the flood. So anyway, and I believe it was these fountains that may well, or these jets that may well have been responsible for the heavy rain for 40 days and nights. One problem with having rainfall over large areas for extended periods of time, you simply cannot condense water fast enough by radiation, by removing the heat by radiation to space to condense that much water. That was a problem I realized back in the 1980s, I think, or maybe even the 70s. So with catastrophic plate tectonics, we now have a mechanism for supporting continuous rain over long periods of time if the water never has to go to vapor phase, if it's simply liquid water that's entrained by these jets that then falls back to the earth. So I'm answering or dealing with a lot of issues that she did not ask about, but they're related. So the crucial issue, the key issue she asked about was the nature of the fountains of the Great Deep, and the best answer I have is that they likely were, or at least may well have been, similar to the black smokers that we currently find on the ocean bottom. and that these were in existence prior to the flood, and that it was along that line, linear occurrences of these black smokers, that's where the ocean floor was pulled apart, cleaved apart, and that's where and that marked the beginning of the flood, and beginning of the cataclysm. So I know that's a little complex answer, more complex than most people would want, but that's my honest conclusion, my honest answer to that question.
No, I think that's good, and I think that's a good segue into encouraging our viewers to tune in tomorrow when we not only talk about Dr. Humphrey's third cosmological model, but also Dr. Baumgartner's CPT, catastrophic plate tectonics. And again, anyone interested, we've still got a good summary by CMI, Creation Ministries International, that I'll send you free if you request it, either email or text me. And I think with that's a good place to end. I know we went a little bit over, and I know all the people, we didn't address all the questions, but I'm rolling these into tomorrow. So tune in tomorrow. And no, I think this is fantastic. And I think that we've presented enough to not only show that naturalism and Darwinism is definitely wanting for lack of intellectual vigor, as I've said for 2 decades myself, but also that creation science needs to be brought before a larger audience. I mean, to analyze. I mean, Dr. Humphreys and Baumgartner have presented a lot of information this evening, and I think, Stephen, if you want to add your final thoughts, close us out, and extend an invitation to tomorrow. We're definitely going to have Stephen give a good presentation of IAC, the creation trail, what it is, how you can get plugged in, how you can get involved, and much more tomorrow. So with that, I thank the speakers. I thank everybody. We did go a little over. And again, we still didn't answer near all the questions. I've got them here. We're going to address them. But definitely, this was fantastic. And I'll pass it over to Stephen.
All right. Hey, guys. Stephen here. So not going to lie, but I usually get a little tired after the sun goes down, and it is 10 o'clock or past here out on the East Coast. So thank everyone for staying with us. It was so good to hear about space and the continents today from Dr. Humphreys and Dr. Baumgartner. Thank you so much, James, for emceeing today. It was so great. The flow went so smoothly, and we're just so glad that all of you were able to join us on Facebook in the Digital Hub and also on YouTube. So tomorrow, you'll be joining us again on the Facebook Digital Hub or on YouTube. You'll get links tomorrow morning, so it'll be at the top of your inbox. You don't have to go digging through emails, so that's always nice. And it's tomorrow. I believe it starts at noon Central Time. Check your itinerary to make sure, but I'm pretty sure noon Central. And before that, in the morning time, there'll be a meet and greet where on Zoom, and everyone will just be able to kind of mingle, and we will be there to interact with you guys and hang out. And then also, if you are an AIM tour guide, there's tour guide training tomorrow morning. So that's really exciting as well. We are training our guides in real time to give creation tours of secular museums. And maybe there might be something special for you guys. If you come to the meet and greet, you might be able to come into that training for a little bit and see how it happens and what goes on. So really excited. So great to have all you here today. I saw people from the Philippines, people from the United States, Canada, all across the world. Tomorrow we'll have people joining us from Africa and Europe. So we're really excited for the many different people that God is bringing together as we learn about God's world through the lens of God's word. Thank you again, Dr. Humphreys. Thank you, Dr. Baumgartner. Thank you, James. Thank you, everyone who's come tonight. And I just wanted to close this in prayer as we head to bed and wake up ready and refreshed for tomorrow. So if you guys would just join me in prayer real quick. Oh, dear Lord God, we just thank you so much for everything you're doing across the whole earth, Lord, for all of our friends in all the corners of the earth. We pray that you would bring us together under your lordship, and that we would be soaking in your truth, God, as we sleep tonight, tomorrow, as we go throughout the day, and what we share with each other, what we share on the broadcast, what we share in the questions, they would all be edifying and building up for the body. And I just pray, Lord God, that you would just watch over us as we sleep, Lord God. Minister to our hearts and let us wake up refreshed, Lord God. I do pray that tomorrow the technology will work out super well, and I thank you for allowing it to work out well tonight, God. Truly, you're the king of the whole earth, Lord God, even with the data packets, Lord. And so just as Dr. Humphreys and Dr. Baumgartner said here today, that you have created all things, and all things have been created to give you glory. So we just want to submit ourselves to you, King Jesus, and we ask, God, that you would receive glory from our lives. And we just pray these things in your holy and precious name. Amen. All right, guys. Well, I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early. If you're on the Pacific Coast, if you're on the East Coast, don't sleep in. Get up early. And everyone, hopefully, you guys come with a scripture or with a song or a word of encouragement tomorrow as we enter meet and greet time. So get some rest, and I'll see you guys in the morning. Thanks so much. God bless.